So we're in our series, Abraham, Chasing God's Promises. I know Adam filled in for me last week, and I'm sure he did a great job. It seems every time I'm gone, the numbers just get higher with attendance. I guess last week was pretty good too. So I don't know where we are today, but whoever's counting, make sure it's more than Adam had last week. Or hurt my ego, I don't know. Years ago, when we were in Illinois, I called there, worked in a church, and planted a church. I worked at a golf course, and I learned a lot more about golf, about taking care of the courses, the machinery, irrigation. Had to work on the irrigation system, and I remember one day we were working on a leak right in front of number 3 green, just a short par 4. Had a leak right there near the sprinkler head, so we dug a hole, figured out what it was. We're going to have to take the sprinkler head off. It was right at the base of the sprinkler head. So Jack, who is a good friend of ours, Jack Renfro, we dig the holes. He turns on the sprinkler so we can get the water out of the line. He says, I got to go to the shed. I forgot something. And he heads off to the shed. And, of course, the sprinkler stops because the timer and stuff goes off on it. It goes back down. I'm like, you know what? I've done this many times. I'm going to help us get ahead of the game. So I start unscrewing the sprinkler head. And as I get almost to getting the sprinkler head off, all of a sudden that thing shoots 25 feet in the air. It probably was longer, but I was too busy getting out of the way because here comes the water gushing off, right? The front of the green's getting flooded, the approach is getting flooded. And about that time, Jack comes back from the maintenance shed, which wasn't very far from there. And he goes, what did you do? I said, I just took the sprinkler head off like we always do. There's the crack. I knew what I needed to do. I thought I'd get us ahead of the game. And he goes, you know what? You were right on everything except one thing. You forgot to let me open the release valve on the other end. See, if you've never worked with a sprinkler system, you may shut off the water on one side, but that water is on an entire circuit. And we have a gate valve that lets all the pressure off. See, we got the water out of the sprinkler right there, but it started backfilling, so all of that pressure came through when I unscrewed that sprinkler. You know, see, sometimes we can try and help things along in our own knowledge and understanding, but sometimes it's better to wait for the one who knows what's going to happen and make sure that he helps us in our way. Today, we're going to see a story of that. When Abraham and Sarah decided they were going to try and take things into their own hands and help God along in his promises. Abraham has been following God for some time now. We'll be in Genesis chapter 17 and 18 here in a little bit. Actually, real quick. Abraham's been following God for a while. God keeps telling him, I'm going to make a great nation of you. Of course, no child has come along yet. And as part of this sign, God is going to meet Abram in Genesis 17. And this is where he's going to change his name to Abraham as a sign of what God is about to do in their life. So let's read Genesis 17, beginning in verse 1. When Abram means high father. Okay, that's the meaning of his name right now. High father. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you and may multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of a multitude of nations. Notice it's plural. It's not just one nation, it's nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but you shall be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. There's his new name, and literally there is the meaning. Multitude, or a father of many nations. So he changed him from high father to a father of many nations. Let's read on in verse 15. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, which means my princess, right? That's the meaning of her name, my princess. Your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name, because I will bless her, and moreover, I will give her a son by her, and will bless her, and she shall become nations, kings of people shall come from her. So he took my princess, and when he moves it to Sarah, it just literally becomes princess. So in other words, she is the reigning leader, or will be the reigning leader. So God is changing their names to match the call, to match the future that he has intended for their lives. Let's read on. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall I Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." But God said, "No, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for the offspring after him." I want you to notice this. God repeatedly, as we've gone through Genesis up to this point with Abraham, he repeatedly tells Abraham, you are going to have a child, and it's going to be through Sarah. That's the way I planned it. That's the way that it works. You know, as I look at the patriarchs, as I look through Genesis and on up throughout the Bible, as we get into the New Testament, one thing I was noticing this week as I was studying and as I've been looking at Abraham and Sarah, they have a pretty good marriage. I mean, Abraham doesn't have multiple wives. They protect each other, right? They go down to Egypt, and Abraham says, "Hey, I want you to tell everyone you're my sister because I don't want them to kill me, to take you so they can have a wife in you." And she does it. They talk about the infertility issues. They talk about the fact they don't have a child together. And Abraham and Sarah stay faithful to each other. Except for one thing, right? This whole idea with Ishmael. If you don't know the story, they don't have a child. And there is a custom in the land that if the man of the house, the patriarch Abraham, goes unto the handmaiden of the wife, which is Sarah, because there were other ladies who were infertile who couldn't have kids, and if they have a child, and the wife of the home, the woman of the house, if she caught the baby when it was being delivered, then that really was her child. Well, it really wasn't her child, but that's what the tradition said, right? And Sarah is like, I haven't given Abraham a son. I am getting old. I'm past that time. I'm going to give you Hagar. Go into Hagar and have a child, and I'll follow these customs, and that can be your heir, Abraham. And they did that. And Ishmael was born, a son. Abraham invests in him, teaches him everything. And when God comes to him years later, that's what we have in this last paragraph we read. Abraham's pleading with God, "Hey, I've been trying with Sarah. We've done everything we can. We went to all the things that there could be. We can't have a child, but I've got Ishmael. Why can't Ishmael be the one?" And God goes, "No, my plan is for you and Sarah to have a child." You know, God is the one that established marriage. God is the one that set it up. He's the one that set things the way they should be. And God blesses us when we follow his order of things. So sometimes we ask God, why can't you just make things work the way that I want them to work? Well, God, why can't I take, and this is what Sarah, why can't I blend a little bit of my culture and my customs and blend it with what you want me to do, and why can't it work? Well, the simple reason is because God has a plan, and he sees what happens in the future when we don't see it. I think that I make a pretty good chili. There's a reason I don't enter the chili contest, because I don't want to hurt Barb's feelings every year, because she would lose. All great chili makers, if you're a great chili maker, you've done this. Some of you just opened a can of Wolff chili and pour it out, right? If you're a great chili maker, how did you get there? Just following the recipe? No. You put in a dash of this, a pinch of that. You try some of this, you try some of that. And usually what happens is you've taken it too far, and that pot of chili is now what? A hot mess of crap, right? Not your dog won't even eat it. Your cat won't even eat it, right? It's just junk. Why? Because you fiddled with it too much. But you find your recipe, right? And then you follow it. See, sometimes many of us still today take what God has as a perfect recipe and we try and fiddle with it, and all we do is mess it up. Abraham had a son, Ishmael, through Hagar. Ishmael, in Genesis 17, chapter 20, it says that he became the father of 12 nations. 12 nations. Isaac has 2 boys, Jacob and Esau. Israel and Edom. There's 2 more nations. After Sarah dies, Abraham remarries. Keturah is her name. And from that marriage, 13 more nations are established. Abraham is the father of 27 nations. When God says, I'm going to make nations out of you, he doesn't mince words, does he? Notice what God says about Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael is the son that Sarah pushed Abraham to have. God says in Genesis 16, verse 12, he shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. My pastor friend, that there's several of us writing this series from actually all over the United States, but my main friend Ron, we were talking about this, and we can't say this word in church, but another name for a wild donkey, right? And he goes, Ishmael has just been a pain in the donkey of Israel ever since. If you don't understand who the descendants of Ishmael are, Iran, Iraq, Palestine, what they call the Palestinian people, those are all the descendants that come from that line. So what I'm telling you is, because Sarah and Abraham decided they were going to fix God's recipe, God's chosen line of people, Israel, not to mention the rest of the world, because aren't we suffering today because of all of their conflict? Yes. All of us have been affected because they tried to mess with God's promise instead of being patient and waiting on him. When we try to improve on God's recipe, we'd better think twice. When we try to adjust with just a pinch of my reasoning, just a dash of my culture, we mess things up. And we have no control of the outcome. Back to my chili metaphor. You ever realized you didn't have time to fix that chili and you had to serve it to someone and you tried to fix it? How did that go? It doesn't work. You can't tame down certain spices that you added a pinch of or a dash of. Later, Abraham is visited by 3 more people. God constantly is reminding Abraham, my promise will come true. Just be patient and wait on me. In my time, it will happen. In Genesis 18, and the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. As he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, I have found favor in your sight. Do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and let me wash your feet. Rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they did. Do as you have said. Abraham recognized, when he saw these people from afar, that this was the Lord. Now, we've talked about this before. In sightings in the Old Testament, there were times that it was clear, whether you want to call it a pre-incarnate Christ, whatever, that Jesus appeared to people. And in this instance, we see a Christophany is what they call it. This pre-incarnated Christ comes to personally talk to Abraham. Well, how did Abraham know that these guys were different than any other Bedouin, any other traveler in the desert? Well, if you have a relationship with someone, you can tell who they are and where they are from a distance, can't you? We were at a family reunion yesterday, and I was listening to one of Deanna's relatives. I guess they're my relatives by marriage, but he was talking about how some guy from the city came out to his farm, and they were looking over the cows, and he said, yeah, that cow's, Bethel or whatever her name was, and that's all her kids. And that cow was this name, and that's this, and named them off. And the guy goes, how in the world do you know the cows and their name when they grow up? And he goes, it's simple. Because I've had that cow for this many years, and I know how many calves she's had, and they follow mom. Well, you can't see that far. He goes, I'm telling you, that's all the cow. When you know, you know. Because Abraham had a personal relationship with God, when God shows up to give encouragement, when God shows up to give guidance, he didn't have to ask, is this God? He knew it was God. Verse 9, they say to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, she is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Get this, the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. Women and older men folk, you know what that means. That means there's no way this girl is getting pregnant. It ain't happening, right? So Sarah, again, all of the evidence, the preponderance, years of trying, the way of the woman has passed her. She can't have a kid. So what does Sarah do? Well, kind of the same thing Abraham did, right? Verse 12, so Sarah laughed to herself, saying, I am worn out, my Lord is old. Shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Remember back when Sarah, I told you the story of she sent Hagar in. You know, I think in Sarah's mind, and I'm not a woman, but maybe going through her mind, you know, we've tried to have kids, and they didn't have all the technology we have today. You know, maybe it's Abraham's fault. Maybe we can't have kids because, you know, he's shooting blanks, right? He just can't get it done. So if he goes into Hagar and they don't have a kid, guess what? I'm off the hook. It ain't my fault. It's all on the old man. So what do you think happened when she gets pregnant and has a son? All the trying in the world of saying, I caught Ishmael when he came out of the womb. All the trying in the world to say, this is my child, it didn't work. We also read in Genesis that Hagar started, you know, poking at Sarah. Hey, I gave him a son. You couldn't do it. And it caused strife so much that Sarah told Abraham, kick him out. Kick him out. So Sarah has to live with all of this stuff. And here comes the Lord, and he says, you're going to have a child. And she just laughs. Her attempt to force God's promises actually led to misery inside of her own house. Verse 14, this is coming from the visitors. It says, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But he said, no, you did laugh. Did the incarnate Jesus say to Sarah, how dare you question me? No. Instead, you find him being of understanding and saying, you still will have a son. You did laugh. He doesn't let her get away with her lies and her conduct, but he doesn't treat her with harsh condemnation like a lot of others would have. You know, excuse me, and we know, we've already read the passage, that there's to call his name Isaac, which means laughter. So think about this. Every time that Sarah says, hey, Isaac, come in, it's time for dinner, she reminded of the fact that she laughed at what the Lord said in front of her. Every time, as a little baby, you know, cooing, holding him in her arms, and she says the name Isaac, she's reminded that she didn't trust God. An ever-present reminder of her faults. So, what happens when we mess with God's plan? When we just want to tweak the recipe just a little? When we blend God's ways with our cultural ways, with our cultural norms? Well, from our story today, I came up with some points, some things that hopefully if we learn them from their bad example, that we don't have to learn. That's one of the things about not teaching history anymore. If you don't study history, guess what? You're bound and determined to repeat the mistakes, right? So what can we learn from this story in God's Word? Well, first of all, we can always know this, and this isn't just true in this story. We can see it all throughout the Bible. God is always faithful, even to the detriment of other promises. And I put the word detriment in quotes. God's promise was always that the nations would come through Sarah, through Isaac. But they messed with the recipe, right? But what did God promise Abraham? I will bless your descendants. Every one of the kids that Abraham sired grew nations. Why? Because God said, I'm going to make nations from you. So if God has a calling on our life, and it is a great calling, and God is faithful to that, we better be careful that we follow his rules. We can cause a lot of strife down the road that we don't intend to cause. Right? I've talked throughout my life and heard other stories of People who have broken their marriage vows, right? And what do they always say? I never meant for this to happen, right? It was just slow decisions, little tweaks, little changes that led to devastation. All these nations came from Abraham because God had a mighty call in his life, and God was faithful to that unconditional covenant. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, that he made with Abraham. But there was only one great nation, right? And that was through Isaac. The very nation that Jesus would come through later and die on the cross for our sins so that we can have heaven as our home eternally. The second thing I think we can get from this, and this is important because we live in a world that doesn't like to do this, God will not ignore uncomfortable things. You know how it goes, right? There's a situation in your family, something's not going right. Maybe it's with one of your kids. And you know what? I don't want to upset them. They're adults now. They're making their decisions. But you know they're doing something wrong, or you're seeing something in their life that's not right. Maybe it's even in your spouse. We talked about this at the men's retreat last year. It's hard for husbands to speak to their spouse, to correct them, even though we're supposed to biblically, because we're afraid of how they're going to take it, and we like to eat, and we like to have a warm bed to sleep in, right? But you notice in this story that the Lord didn't back away from Sarah's inappropriate laugh. Guys, God doesn't back away from uncomfortable things. When you think that you're getting away with something, I want you to understand that God sees it, and it will come back. The same thing should be true in our lives. When we have issues that need to be dealt with, we shouldn't be backing away from the uncomfortable things. It doesn't mean we shouldn't pray about them. It doesn't mean we shouldn't think about them. It doesn't mean, especially if you're going to deal with your spouse, that you don't take the proper tactful time and the way to do it. But we need to correct lovingly. We need to make corrections the proper way. God addressed Sarah directly. You did laugh. Don't lie. You did laugh. I remember growing up, and I've told this story before, and the problem is he's in the audience today, but of all my kids, little young Josiah, boy, he had an issue telling the truth when he was younger. He did have two older siblings that he could blame stuff on, right? But, man, that's one thing that just grates me the wrong way because you don't know what to trust, you don't know what to believe, right? We had to address that. If we didn't address it, as he grows older, that becomes a bigger issue, does it not? We can't let the little things grow. Parents, oh, that's cute, right? Oh, that's just cute, they do it. No, it's not cute because when they get older, it becomes a big liability. We need to address things as they come through. God does not shy away from the uncomfortable things. They have to be dealt with. Hey, you went outside of my rules. You had Ishmael. I'm warning you, Ishmael is going to be a pain in the butt of the entire nation of Israel the rest of their life and the world. And sure enough, they are. Right? Third thing we can learn, and this is straight from the Lord's mouth, nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. Not only did Abraham birth one nation, he birthed 27. All of Abraham and Sarah's shortcomings, all of their attempts to make God's plan come through, even though they screwed it up, God's plan was not stopped. Israel was still established as a great nation. David became a great king, and it says one of his descendants will sit on the throne. There will be a deliverer that comes. All the nations in the world will be blessed through you, Abraham. And sure enough, by Jesus dying on the cross, everyone in the world is blessed through the seed of Abraham. 2 Corinthians 5:17 reads like this. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Like Abram, if you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, he has given you a new name. He has given you a new plan. He has given you a new destination. Everything in your life has become new. The problem is, and here's the catch, we've lived in that old life for so long, we don't know how to walk in this new life, do we? playing golf growing up. Growing up. I started golfing when I was 21. So growing up playing golf, because I'm over 20 now. Growing up playing golf. Had kids, worked in ministry, worked extra jobs, right? Money was tight. It was hard, right? So I would look for, the good golf balls, the Pro Vs, whatever it may be. When you'd find one in the tall stuff or in the woods, you're like, yes, I've got a good. I couldn't afford to buy them, right? Now my kids have left, getting married, getting off my insurance plan, hopefully soon getting off the phone plan. I can buy new golf balls. I have new golf balls. You know what I do? Oh, that one's got a scratch and scuffed up. Yeah, but I can still play it, right? Because I have a habit that's ingrained in me. I can play a new ball every round and it'd be okay, but do I? I'm trying to break myself of it. I really am. Because I can afford all of that ingrained behavior, guys, of our old self is still here. And just like Abraham and Sarah had to learn to truly trust God, even in the biggest promise in their life, the promise of Isaac, we have to learn to walk in faith with him as well. Philippians 1:6 encourages us with this. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. The work started in us from salvation. That was promised all the way back to Adam and Eve. That was promised again here with Abraham. That work that he started, he will bring it to completion. We don't need to try and add to it. We don't need to try and hurry the process along. What we need to do is walk in faith and allow him to work through us. Now, I know all of us here, like Abraham and Sarah, we've tried to take God's plan into our hands, and we've made some shipwrecks, right? We've caused some issues that caused immediate damage. Some of you are realizing that damage now, later in life, whatever it may be. My encouragement to you is the same as encouragement as what we see in their story. God can still bring about his plan in spite of our issues. The question, just like Abraham and Sarah, is the same for us today. If we walk with him, we can enjoy his blessings, and we're not in our own strength trying to fix our mess-ups and try and fix our screw-ups. We allow him to work, and we allow him to transform our lives as we follow him. Well, Pastor, I'm trying to follow him, and I can't delineate his voice. I can't hear his voice. See, that's the problem. You need to turn off all of the stuff that's talking to you, that old lifestyle, and you need to get into his word. You need to spend time in prayer, and I promise you, just like Abram, when he shows up at your tent door, you're going to know it's him. You're going to know the path he has for you to go. Father, I thank you for the time you've given us today in your word. I thank you that we see encouragement from Abraham and Sarah. We see an encouragement of a marriage that, no, it's not perfect. By no means. There's lies, there's deceit, there's justified, even fornication or adultery in there. But yet, in spite of their faults, you still use them to do amazing things. Father, in our lives today, the temptation is great, and man, is it easy to meddle. We want to blend some of our culture with your word to try and make it a little bit more appeasable. Not just in our life, but by doing so, we think that we can be a better influence or better representation to our friends. Forgive us when we keep adding a dash of our own reasoning, when we add a dash of our culture and its understanding to what your word has to say about walking rightly before you. As we get ready to close and have an invitation, I just want to remind everyone the altars are open. If you're struggling with something and you just want to kneel and pray, hey, that's what we're here for. If you need further counsel, that's what we're here for. If you're afraid to walk in front of people, grab one of us after church. The whole idea of church is we're not supposed to do life alone. Jesus established the church so we can encourage one another, instruct one another, care for one another, and even sometimes correct one another as we do life together following him. No one should walk the Christian life alone. So there's no embarrassment if you need more prayer, if you need more help. That's what we're here for. God, have your way through this time of invitation. In your name we pray. Amen.